Welcome to a guided meditation based on the prayer of recollection. As you settle into your place of prayer and meditation, hopefully you have a special place. Take this moment as we start to slow your breathing down and relax your body. Pause now as you take several slow, deep breaths. As you continue this slow, deep breathing, bring your attention and your awareness to Jesus inside of you. You might imagine yourself looking into his eyes with love, and him looking back into your eyes with love. As you start to slow down, you may notice that distractions pop up in your mind. As each distraction pops up, you can acknowledge it and release it. You might say to yourself, I'm worried about or distracted by, whatever, fill in the blank. And then you might say, I trust you with this, Jesus. Or, God, I give this to you. Take this time to acknowledge any distractions that are coming into your mind. You might even want to pause the recording and rejoin when you're ready. You can continue this habit of acknowledging distractions all throughout the time of meditation as they pop up. And now we're going to turn our attention to today's scripture, which comes from James 2, 14 through 17. I'm going to start by reading it to us in the NASB. I've got the NASB and the New Living Translation side by side. So we may actually spend some time exploring back and forth. I like the contrast of the accuracy of the NASB alongside with the readability and understandability of the New Living Translation. So I find they're complementary to each other. So let's start with verse 14. What use is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? I'm just going to pause right there, bringing our attention back to Jesus inside of us. Just letting that verse soak in. Let me read it again. What use is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? The first thing I want to do with this verse is just to think about what James is trying to tell me. So I'm going to just explore the thoughts that are contained in this verse. He's talking about if someone has faith but no works, can that faith save him? And I'm a little bit perplexed by that verse because I can see two sides of a concept here. One side of the concept is that I know that there's nothing that we do to save ourselves, right? Like it's not our faith that saves us. It's Jesus. But then I also think about that Jesus, that his salvation, the way that I receive that is through faith. And then that's going to be part of the equation of the salvation, is the way that I am receiving it in faith. So without that faith, I won't be saved because I haven't received it. So part of me holds the tension of that in my mind as I look at that verse. Is he saying that without that faith, I won't be saved? Or is he saying that, of course, my faith alone won't save me? Just pause and let the tension and uncertainty of that verse settle into my mind. I'm just going to hold that thought in my mind for a moment. Let my mind explore that for a moment. Before I even move to the next verse, as I'm holding that tension, it makes me also want to think back to where were we yesterday and before this. So I bring my mind back to yesterday's section just to refresh it. And I remember that yesterday was talking about how we have all broken the law, that if we break one point of the law, we are violators of the entire law. And then James calls us to speak and act as we are going to be judged by the law of freedom, where Jesus has covered for all of our sins. And he's merciful to us. And as we receive his mercy, we are merciful to others. And he says, this is from the NASB, he says, mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Now I bring my mind back to this first verse of today. What use is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? And it's interesting, in the context of the last verse, now my mind starts to re-explore this, because now I'm thinking about how do I put this into words? I'm thinking about the concept that when we grasp Christ's mercy for us and this new law of freedom that's marked by forgiveness, freedom from sin, freedom from death. I'm not ever going to have to die. When I grasp that, the more that I grasp that, the more that's going to change my heart inside. Jesus, as I love you, the more I let my mind settle on that love and that truth, moment by moment, that's going to change who I am in my actions. I will become merciful because the truth of your mercy has reformed my insides. And so then I wonder, in that context, it seems to me that maybe this verse is saying when it says, can that faith save him? that if my thoughts and my actions haven't been changed, then do I really have faith? If it hasn't changed who I am, have I really received what it truly is? Now my mind is ready to move to the next verse. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and be filled," yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Now I'm just going to let this verse, I guess that was verses, soak in to my mind. It's almost like I'm not just reading here, it's almost like I'm chewing. You know what I mean? Like I could swallow the bite whole, but I think I'd rather chew it. That's what I'm doing here. I'm chewing. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and be filled," yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Hey, let's jump over to the New Living Translation, just for fun. This is how they word it. Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye, and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well." But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? I like that. Goodbye and have a good day. So one of the things I'm seeing in this verse that I haven't seen in my past superficial readings of this book is how he says, "And one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and be filled.' Yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body. What use is that?" Or the NLT says, you don't give the person any food or clothing. So what's interesting here is that James says, "Be warm and be filled." That go in peace, be warm and be filled. That you wished them. How do I say that? You wished them well. In fact, you had specific wishes for them, that they would be warm and that they would be filled. But you did not give them food to fill them or clothing for warmth. So what's interesting to me about that is that he didn't say that you didn't notice that they don't have needs, or he didn't say that you noticed that they have needs but you didn't care, that you were just kind of hard-hearted or insensitive. What you did was you used words to show care. But when I say show care, you see, I even hesitate because it feels like a farce to me. So he's talking about when you act. No, not when you act, because you didn't act. When you speak kindly and supportively, but you have no action. You have no action to support that. You don't actually do anything. You just say it. The words are empty. And I don't know why, but when I say that and think that, my mind goes to Christ. I do know why. Christ is everything. And where my mind goes to Christ is how he was the exact opposite of that. Right? Like James was his half-brother. So he grew up with Christ. And he knew him maybe better than almost anyone. He knew what Jesus was about. Think of Christ. Think of what he gave. I mean, honestly, I don't think I even understand what Christ gave. When Jesus took the wrath for our sins, his greatest gift, I don't think I understand what that cost him. I can only know that I think it was probably the biggest sacrifice that any human has ever made. And I'm not just talking about the physical pain, I'm talking about the spiritual separation that he had from God. And of course, I'll never have to experience separation from God because he did. And also, as a side note, his whole life was lived that way. Every day. It seems like every moment. He was about other people, serving and loving and teaching. I don't even like saying those words because they just sound so churchy and empty if you've been around church for a while. I wish I had better words than serving and loving and teaching and healing. I wish I could get farther past the wall that I have, that wall of familiarity that keeps me from grasping what it really was, what he was really like. Wish I could get into the freshness, more deeply into that freshness. And so I bring my mind back to the verse. And I wonder if James, having seen this in Jesus, having been so deeply changed and wrecked in the good way by him, if he almost, I get this feeling through the whole book so far that maybe he almost has this sense of desperation because he knew Jesus and he knew what he was all about and he knew how radically it had changed him and how it must have I don't even know what the word is, made him so troubled to see people around him who were trying to follow Jesus or who said they were following Jesus, but were living with shallow words instead of the deep conviction that Jesus inspires in the way that we treat other people. I just feel like James is just almost like screaming, not in an irrational way, but in a strong way, to get their attention and to get my attention. And so he uses this strong example, which, by the way, after having heard it so many times in my life, it's easy, again, for that familiarity to distance me from the strength, almost ironic humor that he's using here. And then he says, I think we're ready to move to the last verse here. In the same way, Faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. I giggle a little because this is one of those places where the NASB translation is a little clunky. Faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. I'm not even going to look at the New Living Translation yet because I just want to try to let the words of what that original language meant just stay in my mind by itself. Yes, I did just use the same words unintentionally. I'm looking again in the same way. Faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. Now, I would invite you just to pause as we let the climax of this section sink in. And as we just let our minds reflect on what he has just said in light of the verses coming right before this. So you might even want to just pause the recording right now as you let your mind probe and chew and explore this. So in looking at it, one of the things where my mind goes is circling back to the first verse of the section where he says, "What use is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith but has no works? Can that faith save him?" And then now linking that back to verse 17, in the same way, faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. So the first question that my mind is raising related to this is it faith if you don't have works? Isn't it? It's interesting that he says faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. If faith is by itself without works, is it faith? Is it even faith? So then that makes me wonder, what was the original word used for faith? Because when I think of faith, I think of how Jesus talked about that we have to have faith in him and that we have to have trust and belief in him. So I think of those words like trust and belief. But when I think of trust and belief, I think, trust and belief, and I think this is James's point, can't really be by themselves, or they're not trust and belief. And indeed, I think that's the point he's making, is that it's dead. It's not an alive faith. It's a dead faith. But so that's not even faith, right? So that's what kind of makes me wonder. I wonder what word was originally used for faith. So this is a place where I feel like I want to stop and use the commentary to see if I can find that original word. A couple of days ago on the vlog, I made a vlog about one of our James sections where I showed how you can use our printable text, which is linked to the Bible Hub website. You can go directly to the Bible Hub website. You don't have to go through the printable text. And you can find the actual original words from the language. Now, generally, I try not to use those during my time of meditation because I think it can be distracting from this process that we're in. You can kind of start geeking out on words and kind of keep in the head space instead of going into the heart. But sometimes I think I'm going to be able to meditate better if I understand what that word meant. So I'm going to try to put a link, first of all, to the vlog where I did that in case you want to see how that works with that website. It's very cool. And I'm going to pause right now, and I'm going to go grab that, and I'm going to look it up and see if it gives us any more insight. Okay, I'm back, and you'll never guess what I found. This is what it says that the original word meant: faith, belief, trust, confidence, fidelity, faithfulness. Okay, you guys, it actually means exactly what I took it to mean. But what I was doubting and questioning, thinking maybe it didn't mean that. So it is the idea of trust and belief and fidelity. So I thought my theory was that he might be saying something like your religious ceremonial religiousness or something like that. But no, he's not. So now, letting the mind sink into that, he is saying your trust, your belief, your fidelity to Christ is dead. Meaning there's no life in it. Meaning it doesn't exist. See, I was thinking, well, if you have a dead faith, you have a faith, it's just dead. But no, I think he's saying that's not faith. It's not alive. It doesn't exist. Now, the next thing my mind is exploring in this verse is that he says, in the same way, faith also. So he's saying, if you tell someone, be warm and filled and have peace, but you don't do anything to warm or fill them, that is the same as having faith that is dead. See, I would have thought that he would have said to tell someone to be warm and filled is a dead faith, because of what he said in earlier sections about that true religion is caring for the widows and the orphans. And it seems like here he's kind of giving the counterexample of that, right? Like not taking care of someone who needs food and clothing. But he doesn't say that means your faith is dead. He says that example is the same as having dead faith. Okay, so let's wrap our head around that. If wishing someone well in word, but not doing anything that you can to help them, is the same as having faith that's dead, what does that mean? I'm just going to pause, let my mind explore that. You might pause the recording now too. Think about that comparison. What does that mean? So where I came to, and it's pretty straightforward, but my thought was to say to someone, be warm and filled, and not do anything, if that's the same as saying, if that's the same as having a faith that is dead, then for me, in my mind, the equivalent is a faith, I'm going to use air quotes there, that is empty or just words and no actions, which, of course, when I think about that, I realize that's been basically the very strong theme all throughout James up to this point, is that whole concept of having words of faith, but no actions behind it. And of course, that is a dead faith. It also makes sense, too, when you think about James's audience, right? That he was writing to, back to the Bible Project video, he was writing to Christians who were converted from Judaism. I shouldn't say converted, because you don't leave Judaism to become a Christian, right? You actually fulfill your Judaism to become a Christian. In fact, I think that the people who are Jewish Christians are like God's twice over. I'm God's once over, because I don't have the heritage of Judaism that God started the whole thing through. So, but these were people who professed to be Christians. These weren't people who said, I don't love Christ, I don't believe in Christ, I don't belong to Christ. These were people who said, yes, I do love, believe in, and belong to Christ. But apparently, based on these writings, they weren't having the actions that showed that. I don't know if you feel it, but right now I feel a sense of like a big exhale. Just having worked through this section and now feeling like, okay, now I'm ready to look at Martha. Put your own name in the blank there. Are you feeling that? That's what I'm feeling. So I'm thinking about, I've got this concept. In fact, I'm going to take a moment to write it down. Go ahead and pause if you'd like and write down. What I'm going to write down is faith that has words and no actions is empty and dead. And I suppose that's fairly obvious and straightforward, but my experience has been that when I look at a teaching, even one that's obvious and straightforward, without chewing on it for a while, it's not very meaningful to me. It does feel, when I don't chew for a while, it does kind of feel like I'm swallowing the whole bite and not getting the nutrients out of it. That, I don't know if that's a very good analogy, but so now, because I see that what I wrote was faith that has words and no actions is empty and dead. It's basically a restating of the last verse, right? But it's in my heart in a new way now. Now I'm ready to look at me. Interestingly, I feel like what I wrote here is a teaching. What does this show me about God or about humanity? This is about humanity. I wasn't trying to write the teaching, but I guess that's where my brain goes naturally. And so then I could take this in a variety of avenues. I could think about, I could spend some time in tax with adorations, confessions, supplications. I'm just going to tell you immediately my brain goes to an adoration of Jesus. And this fits with some of the adorations that I've had in previous sections in James. That Jesus, I adore that you call us to a real faith that's not dead and empty and shallow words. And that while my natural inclination toward life may be not to reach out and help people may not be to take action for someone other than myself, I see what a hollow, destructive life that is. And I adore that you have called us to a life of beauty and meaning and significance that's not based on our own gratification. When I see the beauty of that, and I let that soak into my heart, it blows me away. And of course, I confess that most of my life has been about me. And this would be a time where we could pause and look back at the last 24 hours. And we could see where our actions revealed that we weren't living with an alive faith the way that we thought, the way that we treated people. We could also spend time in reality and vision here. Those confessions could be teased out to see what that looks like in reality. When I'm living that way, what's actually going on in my attitudes and the way I'm treating people. And the vision. What would my life look like if it were explosively true that my faith was alive in every thought and every action of my day? I think about that right now. I think about the day that's ahead of me. I encourage you to think about the day that's ahead of you. What would that look like if it were explosively true that your faith was alive? I'm just melted with the thought. If my faith were alive today, explosively alive, what a life, what a day to go from living for myself, my selfish little tunnel, my numb treadmill, to living with a heart that's on fire with faith that steps easily into responsive action. Oh, Jesus. Please. Please. May it be so. Jesus, I want you. I don't want the old me. And I praise you for the hope that you've given me for this new life. It's beautiful. Thank you, Jesus.